thanks everybody for coming. We're delighted to have you here today for the next 30 minutes. We're going to be talking to you about diversity and accessibility in the creative industries. And this involves some personal experiences as well as examples from case studies that I've worked on as a keyworder in this industry. So to get things started, Natalie will talk to you now about her experience within her work and her personal experiences in the creative sector. So Natalie, welcome to the discussion.
Hi, my name is Natalie Trevonne-Gross, as Clemency introduced me, and I wear a lot of hats, but I am a marketing and outreach coordinator for Blind Institute of Technology, and I also do a lot of accessibility consulting for fashion and entertainment. So today, I kind of want to go through what blindness is and give some statistics and just kind of give my experience with images. And so blindness is really, it's on a spectrum. And I think for a lot of people, they think when they talk about blindness, they think it's just one thing, like we all just can't see. And that is not true. You know, there's different variations of blindness. There's low vision, there's partial vision, and then there's high partial. And so there's three different types. So I fall under the total. I do have light perception and I can see colors, but for the most part, it's like looking out of a gray cloud. And so the really good thing to know about vision loss is that anybody can become blind or low vision at any point of their life. And so this is why it's so important, because it can happen to your friends or families or to you. And so including people with disabilities, specifically those using screen readers, which I'm using today to do the presentation. And a screen reader is just a program that reads whatever's on a screen. So anything that I tap on my phone or anything that I press on my keyboard on the computer, the program will read. And so when we're looking at websites or images in specific, a lot of times it just reads image, image, image. And that's why having alternative text, which is a breakdown of a photo, and it's great to make it contextual. So that means like whatever you're trying to convey, that's what you want to describe in your photo. And so when you don't have an image description, it just reads image or it's a series of numbers. So imagine going through a website or being on Google Images and you're just hearing F36535554322. Like that's super annoying. And so that's what a lot of screen readers are hearing. And so, you know, part of what I do outside of being a marketing and outreach coordinator is I have a fashion podcast, called Fashionably Tardy. And what we say is that we bridge the gap between fashion and disability. And a lot of what we do is accessibility consulting for fashion brands. And as we all know, it's a very visual industry. And it's very photography based. And so what we like to tell them is that you need to add alt text to your pictures on your website when you're selling clothing so that people who are visually impaired can have the same shopping experience as those who are able-bodied. And so if you're trying to sell a pair of jeans or shoes, it's really important to say that, okay, hey, this is a photo, right? You have your photo, and this is a pair of black shoes with white stripes. And they are this material, and they are round at the sole, like just different types of things to help us understand like what you're trying to sell. And that's with any photo. It doesn't have to be with products, but it can be any type of Google image. I had to do a job one time where I had to style an influencer, and I went on Google Images to try to pull types of clothing that I wanted her to wear for this particular video she was doing. And I nearly cried because none of the images were described. And even the product descriptions left a lot to the blind imagination. And so it's really, really important that, you know, you include us when you're thinking about photos and just on your website in general, because like, even if I go on a website, a lot of times it's not just lack of image descriptions, it's, you know, lack of buttons being labeled and links. So it literally just reads image, 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 button, 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 link, link, link. And so think of somebody trying to look for something, how frustrating that would be, because you have no idea what's on the web page. And so Clemency and I are just encouraging everyone to take the steps to educate themselves about alternative text, and using descriptive language when showing images. And if anybody has questions, are curious, are interested in making their photos more accessible or their website more accessible, my company BIT does do website auditing, and we do help businesses become more accessible on their website. And you can email me personally at natalie.gross@blindit.org. Again, that's natalie.gross@blindit.org. And I'm going to hand it back over to Clemency.
Thanks, Natalie. There was a slide earlier on which we didn't talk through, so please do come back and have a look at this slide when you've got a moment to do that. So I think what Natalie and I are trying to do is just encourage people to think about access for all. So we all deserve to have access to content on the internet. Information is there to help people do their jobs day to day, to educate, to inform, to enlighten. So we want to make sure that everything is accessible as possible, but of course we're living in a changing world, and as David said in his welcome speech, we need an up-to-date awareness of the language, because words matter and the language is constantly changing. So in fact the only thing that is constant is changes in lifestyles, technologies, businesses, customers, language, and the environment in which we live in. So as a keywording consultant, my job is to make sure that everybody can access information that is relevant, and that they can do this quickly and easily using relevant metadata to describe the images, to describe the concepts within the images that can't literally be seen, but they have to be interpreted. So there is an element of making conceptual imagery presentable to customers who can't see them yet. They haven't actually got to the search engine yet. They just have an idea of what they're looking for. So we need the keywords to adapt to those needs of the customer and the changes in the environment in which we're working. So the key things that the keyword revolution does now, as we're working in this DAM space, is to ensure that keywords reflect the changes in our society and culture. We want to make content more accessible to as many diverse audiences as possible. And obviously the ultimate goal is to make search better for all users, not just the able-bodied or the impaired people, but all visually impaired and users with different varying disabilities. So the driving force behind this for many businesses is, how will this help their brands? How will it help your organization from a retail perspective, and how will it help communicate and engage with a broader audience? So some research done recently by a leading global photo agency, Getty Images, concluded that 63% of consumers buy from brands that represent people like themselves. So the implication here is they're looking for content that represents the various types of groups within society, from different backgrounds, different ethnic groups, genders, sexual orientation, and these kinds of things. And if 63% of consumers recognize that within the content, then we also need keywords to help catalogue that imagery so that it can be accessible for the brand managers and the marketing and advertising teams within your businesses. And again, 71% of consumers say it's important that the companies buy from, that the companies they buy from celebrate diversity. So again, this can be seen through the imagery that is used, that's published, that's created, all the images that are photographed with a specific creative brief in mind, using specific type of models. This all has to be factored into the life cycle of the image within the marketing campaign. And this follows right the way through to the metadata used to describe that imagery. So taking a few visual examples from stock photo libraries that I work with, in fact, this photographer here is one of my clients. What we're looking at is an image of a lady who is practicing yoga, and she's an amputee. And the idea that we're trying to represent all people with different abilities within the stock photography industry is gaining huge momentum right now. The issue we have with this is, first of all, people who are sighted and can search on a search engine in a sort of quotation marks normal way wouldn't necessarily know what language to use to find this image. They might not know the correct terminology, or the terminology that's most likely to be entered as a keyword, which makes the image searchable. So we have that aspect to think about. But as Natalie said, we've also got the aspect of alternative text. And the purpose that alternative text serves is to read the information that's embedded in the image to a person who is not sighted or low sighted, so that they can see what's being portrayed in the image and therefore decide whether it's a relevant result for them or not. And in actual fact, what we can see here is the alternative text that was generated automatically in PowerPoint when I put the slideshow together is somewhat misleading, if not totally untrue. So the alternative text that was automatically generated for this image of the amputee doing yoga is a person stretching on a couch. Because obviously, if we're just looking at pixels and putting that information together as a machine would, then they can see the couch and they can see the person who is stretching, but it hasn't captured any of the meaningful concepts or important ideas and themes behind this image and the reason why it was taken. Obviously, going back to the idea that brands will resonate more, have greater resonance with customers if they can represent diversity and reach out to people from those different communities. So the alternative text on this image is doing absolutely nothing in that respect. It wouldn't help somebody who was reliant on a screen reader. And actually, if it was being used to auto keyword the image, it wouldn't help either. Another image here portrays the relationship between the two fathers and the young daughter. So we've got a same-sex couple. Again, what's the terminology that we would use to find imagery like this? We've got questions around what's acceptable, what's considered, appropriate. Is there any offensive language? Is there any language that we should avoid adding as search terminology? And again, how do we help our staff and users internally classify and tag content like this? How do they know which terminology to be using themselves? So the relationship here, again, can be captured through keywords. And as a keywording consultant, I work with different clients who have different needs in terms of the relationship keywords they want for their content library. And it does vary from one content library to the next. Again, the example here from the auto-generated alternative text is fairly telling. This one has been described by the machine as a picture containing text, comma, person. So it tells us nothing about the relationship or the fact that there are two fathers with their daughter, relaxing in the kitchen using a laptop and that kind of thing. And to Natalie's point, for alternative text to have to serve the purpose it needs to serve, it would really need to describe in great detail exactly what we can see in this image and what's happening in order to convey the intangible, in effect, the invisible image to somebody who's reliant on the screen reader. So another area in terms of terminology that's constantly changing to reflect the changes in society is the ethnic diversity keywords. And coming from a stock photography background myself, working with metadata, I know the importance of these keywords for picture buyers and picture editors when they're making selections for imagery. The reason is again, they want to create authentic portrayal of people that keeps up with modern day society. And where we've got mixed families and blended families and different ethnic groups, we need the right keywords to help express that. And this is actually a real family. Again, the photographer is one that I work with. And this is a real extended family with the grandmother, the parents, the two children, and then there's an older son from another family who's involved in this image as well. So just to kind of drive home the point here about automated alternative text and where that can really let us down, the image here, which as we can see depicts the family, again, hanging out on the weekend, spending quality time together with these various ethnic groups and different age ranges. It's simply described as a group of people sitting around a table, which is actually inaccurate given the fact I can't see a table in the image. So we need to really think about this and we really need to address this so that all users can actually have access to content online and images like this using their screen readers. So we've talked about this before, Natalie and I, but the secret of getting ahead really is getting started. And this quote by Mark Twain really sets the scene for the work that we're trying to do collaboratively within the DAM space. What we want is for people to start acknowledging that we don't all see and read things in exactly the same way. And even when we do, we don't all use the same language. So what one person might find offensive is absolutely fine for another user, and so on and so forth. And then apart from your external customers, you've got your internal customers and users and stakeholders who also need to understand the language that you're using. So I think the quote here is about helping people to understand that we can start by making small steps, and we can start by at least speaking to our users, speaking to our customers, trying out language, new language changes within the vocabulary, and monitoring that so that we can keep ahead of awareness, make sure that the language is changing and adapting, and make sure that the words we use really matter.
Great. Hi, it's David. Sorry I wasn't here to introduce you. Natalie, I'm talking with you from McLean, Virginia, and I'm in my home office. I've on a navy blue shirt and a navy blue sport coat, which people have seen me being wearing for a long time. And it's very wooded outside my office and quite gloomy because we're getting the afterwash of Hurricane Ida, which is bringing big weather adventures here to the Washington, D.C. area. I've got glasses on and I've got naturally curly hair that's gray. So, and I welcome the opportunity to have both of you speak to this extremely important topic, the advent of what here in the States we call the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the precursor regulatory actions that led to the promulgation of the ADA and enforcing access as a civil right, not just a regulatory conferred right, is something that every professional working in DAM here with that particular vocabulary and elsewhere with different vocabulary needs to be keenly aware of. And I thank both of you for helping to bring this awareness to the many, many, many thousands of people who are joining us at the festival today. I've got a couple of questions that have come in, and one that I was curious about. Natalie, I don't know if you have, I was wondering if you could share a little bit about what the requirements for described video are. There's one set in the United States, there's another set in Canada, and I don't know what they are in the United Kingdom, but could you take a moment to talk about that, and then Clemency, if you'd like to hop in too.
So describe video is a totally different ballgame. It's called audio description. And I don't know the exact requirements for audio description because even though it's been around for a long time, people are just now starting to really include it, which is great, but we need to see more of it. But I think there is a group out of New York City called Bridgefield Media. There's also Michelle Spitz, who does audio description, if you want to look both of those people up. But yeah, audio description varies because I don't know if there's a set of rules because I've seen people do it differently every single time. And some is more descriptive than others, which kind of sucks because like, you know, you might be watching a show that you really like and you want them to be very descriptive and they're not. One show that was really popular on Netflix came out in 2020 was Bridgerton. That audio description was great. And also there's another show on Netflix called Tiny Pretty Things. It was about ballerinas and the dancing was flawless and the audio description was so on point. So those are two shows. If you want to see how audio description should be done, I would highly recommend going to watch those shows with audio description on. And you can go into the audio settings on your Netflix page and turn it on. And I think those would be great ways to kind of educate yourself on what it sounds like and how it's done right.
Great, Clement, that was terrific. And thanks for those two examples. Clemency, any thoughts on described video that are in kind of the adjacency to what you're known as around the world as an expert in?
So I'm not really doing the audio description for video, but I do describe video terminology within the keywording metadata schema for the clients that I work with. So we're looking to capture the basic things to help people find things like a clip length, a certain number of seconds, or camera movements, or any kind of camera technique. So we'll add that as metadata within the keywording schema, and that helps people find, you know, specific types of video content. But I did think Natalie's point was really interesting, that even when we have the audio description in place, it's still quite a subjective process, and it's edited in the way that we edit keywords. So we get to choose which keywords we feel are most relevant and important. And I think it's worth bearing in mind, both as a keyworder and an audio description writer or an alt text writer, that you have to take on this responsibility for thinking about everybody and every type of user and the way that they will interpret a certain keyword or a certain description. So I just think that Natalie made a really interesting point, that some do it really well and some don't do it so well. And we need to try and strike for a more kind of neutral, objective mindset when we're classifying audio or alt text or writing keywords even.
And I'll use that to transition to an interesting question that came in about, have either of you seen examples where an artificial intelligence tool, an AI tool, has been used with a body of images and generated metadata? And then could you describe what the workflow was to adjudicate that to better be involved, to make better discoverability in the circumstances that we're talking about?
Yeah, I can probably say that the case studies I've worked on have not been hugely successful, where AI has been used to auto-generate the keywords, the captions, the metadata, and probably the alternative text, as we saw in the images in the slideshow. It has very limited information to go on, and it obviously doesn't have emotional empathy in the way that a human being does. And again, it doesn't have quite the same level of editing sophistication that a human being does. So in cases where AI has been used to generate keywords, which is the area I focus on predominantly, it's always had to be edited out by a human being who kind of, you know, audits the results, and then to a certain extent decides where the machine has got it right and where it hasn't. And there's quite a lot of work to be done once the machine's done its first sweep in tidying up and undoing some of those mistakes. So I think it can have its uses where you're looking at images that are very, very simple, perhaps that don't involve people, certainly not relationships and, you know, ethnic sort of attributes and all these different things that we try and capture as keywords as humans. I think where it's just something very simple and straightforward, you know, a kind of studio shot of a product, for example, that could work quite well.
Natalie, have you had any projects, opportunities, consulting gigs that you were working on where someone was trying to use an artificial intelligence tool or machine generated data that then probably went through a workflow, much like Clemency just said?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So in my experience, I have not seen that work. Like Clemency was saying, it's almost never accurate. And so most people still have to go in and edit the captions, especially when you're talking about alternative text, because like I mentioned before, it needs to be contextual. So if you're trying to sell a red dress and the AI is just talking about the lady with long hair standing outside, then, you know, your product is not being conveyed in the right way. And so typically we would steer clients into the direction of Scribely with Carolyn DeRosier, who will go in and help people alt text their images that have already been put up, and then encourage them to moving forward to have someone do the alternative text and moving forward. So yeah, that would be my advice. The AI is just not at a point where it's giving enough information yet.
Yeah, it'll be interesting for all of us to monitor that. To use an indefinite pronoun, the AI gets better and better and more interesting. And it is one of those things that part of what makes our career field quite interesting is that it keeps giving us opportunities to assess its efficacy and see can we put it to use. In tandem, Natalie, with what you just said, with that very good suggestion, we've had a couple of questions come in where our peers are asking us, how do I convince leadership or administration about how important this is? Or maybe some introductory resources that I can share with my management to gain support about accessibility deficits in our current technologies and procedures. It's a lovely and a thoughtful question. And I wonder if both of you could maybe comment on a couple of experiences or resources. What potential for dialogue with that question?
Yeah, so I would start by letting your organizations know, number one, alt text increases SEO. So if you want your pictures or websites to be seen first on Google, you want to have the alt text. It's gonna put you at a higher ranking, which it comes down to your bottom line. Also, the disability industry is $1 billion industry. And so when you're not accessible, you're missing out on a bunch of money. Because guess what? If we can't access your stuff, we're not buying it, period, point blank. And so I think it's a money game for a lot of businesses, sad to say. Like, I wish we could say, oh, you should be inclusive because it matters. Nobody cares about that at this point. It's all about money. And so I think just explaining to them, like, finding statistics online, you can Google, it's getting to $1 trillion industry, because not only is it about disabled people, but it's about their friends and families who support them. And so if you have a brand or if you have an organization that truly is inclusive, people are automatically going to jump on board and want to purchase or whatever, want to support that particular organization. So, and, contacting, people who work in SEO and having them explain to your business, like, yeah, this does help. I think is where you want to start, because, like, I'm sure most of your employers are going to speak money versus heart, and it's a sad thing to say, but that's what it comes down to. Clemency, I don't know if you want to add to.
Clemency, do you want to add to that?
Yeah. Thanks, Natalie. Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, it's in the same way that keywords help SEO. They're kind of considered something you have to do. It's a necessary evil. You have to do them at the end because they do something to help people find things. But actually, the only way people can find things online is by entering metadata. Alt text is metadata, keywords are metadata. So that together they both boost SEO. And as you say, that comes down to the bottom line for most organizations. And I do think whilst organizations are more kind of attracted to what they stand to gain financially from doing this work, plenty of organizations that are purpose-led and driven by the ethical the ethical values that we're talking about today will want to start looking at their alternative text. And to the organizations wanting to take that to management, I would talk about the values that your brand can project out to the community and communicate with your prospective customers as being very positive and supportive and embracing the changes that we're trying to address through this metadata, and to just kind of get buy-in in the same way you would for any type of change that we talk about in the DAM space, that it's all about making people's lives easier, creating accessibility, leveling off the opportunities for people to access content. And if we can play a part in that and improve the bottom line financial figures, then obviously that could be seen as a very positive thing.